celebrate Black History Month, I am reminded of the greatness of Africa. And if you don't know, the archaeologists and the sociologists and the scientists have all agreed that the oldest human remains are in Africa in a place called the Olduvai Gorge. They found the remains of a black woman who they have named Lucy. And so when we celebrate Black History Month, we don't just celebrate Black history, we celebrate the history of the world, because all of us can be traced back to a single black mother, a single African female. There are no other remains that they have discovered that are older than hers. So we're all connected more than you could possibly imagine. I celebrate something known as Kwanzaa. And in my home, when we celebrate Kwanzaa, I tell them, tonight we're all African. By doing that, I'm just reminding us that there's more that brings us together than sets us apart. Sometimes we forget on our journey that we wind up in different places, but we all started at the same place, and we're all returning to the same place. There is one God, some would say one nation under God, that is beyond this country. Anyway, when we think about the incredible contributions of African Americans in this country, after the incredible contributions of Africans to world history and civilization, I recognize that slavery is a difficult topic to discuss. I understand that the governor in Florida has decided that African American history has no educational value for young people who are on their way to college. If you don't know, the reason we have an African or Black History Month is Carter G. Woodson was one of the first black men to go to school and graduate from Yale University. When he was there, he realized that there was one paragraph about black history in all of his graduate studies. And he decided that we need a day, no, we need a week to just explore these incredible contributions, because black history is American history. It is a history of triumph. It is a history of struggle. It is a history of courage. It is a history of showing up again and again and again in the face of adversity. And as horrific as the institution of slavery was, it is wrought with stories of bravery and heroes. Some of them wanted to escape slavery so bad that they went to incredible lengths. Many of you may not have ever heard of a gentleman by the name of John Box Brown. He mailed himself to freedom. He crawled inside a box that was shorter and only slightly wider than this box. And this wasn't our traditional or conventional modern mail system. That means he spent weeks in a box with a small piece of bread and some water. And at times, he said that the box would be turned upside down and the blood would rush to his head, and he thought he was going to pass out. And he would wait, and then the box would get jostled, and he'd be on his side. And he said it was worth every second just to be free. And freedom is something that we advocate and celebrate in this country. We want people to be free. We want to have our freedom, our dignity, our emancipation. Another gentleman that I had the pleasure of working on a play last year where I directed, Robert Smalls, was born into slavery, and his mother and his father and his grandparents were born into slavery for as far back as he could remember. At some point, he learned about boating and tides, and he became the captain of a ship. Now, he couldn't literally be called the captain because they wouldn't give a black man that title. However, he ran the ship. When the Civil War broke out, his ship was commandeered by the Confederate Army to be a warship. So he was literally the captain of a ship that was designed to help keep him enslaved. And he did that job with dignity. And he had a crew. And he made sure that they operated with dignity. And one night, when the Confederate soldiers got off the ship and went into town to carouse and drink, he stole the warship. And because he was the captain, he knew all of the signals to pass through the various ports that would have prevented him from moving on. And he took this ship all the way up to Washington, D.C., and sold it to Abraham Lincoln in exchange for his freedom, and his family's freedom, and his crew's freedom, and his crew's family's freedom. And then he said, that's for the ship. But the ship also has weapons and ammunitions, and for that, I would like cold, hard cash. Abraham Lincoln and the United States government paid him cash money for the weapons on this ship. He took that money and went back to Charleston, South Carolina, where he had been enslaved pretty much his entire life, and bought the plantation where he had grown up. And then later, the woman who once owned him, in her senility and old age, showed up at the house and said, "This is my house." And he let her live there until she died. He gave her her room back and treated her with dignity and honor and respect until she passed. Robert Smalls goes on to be the first black elected congressman in South Carolina and established what then became and is now known as the public school system, because he knew that every individual that was considered an American had the right to an education. We forget about these people, or we never hear about these people, but that's an American story if there ever was one. To do the right thing when there is a right thing to be done. Now, most of the time we think about Black History Month, we think about Martin Luther King. And I'm grateful that we do. And I said this morning, and I'm going to say it again. People ask me, man, you've been doing these Martin Luther King speeches for 40 years. And you've got all these speeches committed to memory. Do you ever get tired of doing it? And the answer is no, I don't get tired of doing it. And the other answer is, I'll be grateful when I don't have to tell people the same thing over and over and over again anymore, because we will have gotten it. The message is simple: be kind, be loving, be forgiving, and treat other people the way that you want to be treated. Man, it's really simple. And people think about Martin Luther King and they go, he lost his life fighting for civil rights. I just want you to know that's not true. He lost his life because he wanted to end all poverty and end all war. They let him have the right to vote. They let him sit in the front of the buses. They let him sit in cafes and lunch counters. But the moment he said, we've got to end all war and all poverty, and the two might be connected, they said, that's enough from you. We've given you what you asked for. Now you're pushing it. And the truth is, it was never his goal to fight for black people. He was fighting for freedom. But when he saw this issue of racism, he was like, this should be one we can get by. This should be one we're able to resolve and move forward. So let's take care of this, and then we'll get to the real work. Because the idea of eliminating poverty, even in the 1960s, was the belief that there is enough money and enough cars and enough jobs and enough homes and enough clothes and enough food to take care of the entire planet over and again. Something is out of kilter. Right now, we have more billionaires than we have ever had in the history of the world who are taking trips into outer space for a few seconds, and it's costing billions of dollars to do that. At the same time, we have more homeless people on the street than we have ever had in human history. Everybody in this room, probably before you get home today, you're going to pass by a person who doesn't have a place to live. Whether they're on the side of the freeway or at the gas station or at the grocery store or at the 7-Eleven begging for money, everybody in this room is going to encounter an individual probably within the next 24 hours that is homeless. And we have no idea how they wound up that way. Well, I'm going to share with you. Some of them got there because of mental issues. Some of them got there because of substance abuse and addiction problems. Some of them got there because they went to war. And I'm not talking about Vietnam. I'm talking about Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, young people. And when they came back, they were never the same because we are not designed to kill each other. Some of them are there because they came out to their families and said, I have this particular belief or practice or way of being that was unacceptable to their families. Really, to me, it doesn't matter how they got there, they're still human beings. So my charge this year, everywhere I go, is the next time you see a person without a house or a home, don't pretend like they're not there. You don't have to give them your money. You don't have to give them socks or food or clothes. Just look at them. Offer them some dignity and some humanity back. Look at them in the eye and say, I see you. Stop pretending like they're not there. Some of them are out there because they had a family member who had a medical emergency that they sold everything to take care of that person, lost them anyway, and now they have nothing. And it's not my job to judge how they got there. I know if I was on the street homeless and saying, man, do you have a quarter? Will you buy me some water? I don't want to have to explain to you and your Mercedes how I got there. I just want to be reminded that I'm human and that I have dignity and that I'm a part of the larger society in spite of what you think. I encourage my students to do that because sometimes young people look at homeless people and wave, and I've talked to some of these homeless people. It changes their life from a child looking and smiling in spite of their experiences and their situation to just wave and smile. Stop acting like they're not there. They're there. The talk topic this morning is supposed to be, I can help. Not if I can help. Simply, I can help. Everybody in here can do something. You don't have to do everything, but you can do something. You don't have to be charismatic, but you do have to care. And you don't even have to be brave. You just have to be willing to show up and help. Smile, wave, offer them something that probably means very little to you anyway. My students, we get these drums from various villages in West Africa. For the most part, the proceeds go right back to those villages to help with food and clothes and water and medicine and educational supplies. One year, we took a trailer load of school supplies, and the kids had backpacks and notebooks and pens, many of which they were going to get new stuff for next year anyway. Everybody can do something. You don't have to do everything, but you can do something. Anyway, that's what he was telling us. That's what he was reminding us. And in his own eulogy, he said, if I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living will not be in vain. And so I just want to share with you some of the words of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I thank you guys, I thank all these audiences that you have to listen to me first, just for a minute, and then we'll get to the King. But the Spirit of King lives through me. And the work I do with kids, I don't make a lot of money doing that. As a matter of fact, it often costs me money. But it's worth every second that I get to put my hands on some young people and encourage them to be better human beings. And so now I'm encouraging the adults to do the same thing. Let's be better human beings. Let's be better spiritual beings, having this human incarnation by simply being willing to help somebody and forgive everybody. I'm going to say that again because I didn't get any amens in there. Forgive everyone. And what that means, the word forgiveness is designed to be giving forward. So stop waiting on people to make amends and make it right before you can forgive them. If you're waiting on them to come to you and say, you know what I did was really wrong and I'm really sorry and I'll never do it again, that's not forgiveness, that's a negotiation. Forgiving them means giving them something you don't think they have earned or deserve, but you give it to them anyway. Where I come from in Compton, they would say you always give people more credit than you think they're due. Only two things are possible outcomes. One, they were entitled to more credit than you gave them to begin with, or two, they begin to live up to the credit you just offered them. Forgive everyone, because not forgiving them is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Meanwhile, they've gone on to piss somebody else off and they aren't even thinking about you. And you're holding on to this, I can't believe they did that to me. I'll never forgive it. Let it go. It's funny to me, but one of the Disney movies, the lyrics to the song are, let it go, let it go, let it go. It's not serving you. It's not serving them. And you don't have to call them on the phone and say, I forgive you for the horrible person you've been for most of my life. All you have to do is, in your heart, let it go. Kids do it all the time. They're in an argument on the playground, and then 2 minutes later, it's all good. Because that stuff is small. Let it go. If you can't forgive everybody, forgive somebody today. And if you don't know how to do that, practice on yourself. Forgive yourself for something you know you did that was wrong, that you're still holding on to, and is not allowing you to fully show up in the way you know you need to. And then when you get the strength and the courage, practice on somebody else. It's not if I can help, it's I can help. So without any further ado, here are some of the words of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A man came to Jesus and he had a question. And he thought that he was smarter than Jesus, that he was going to ask this profound question and show that he knew more than Jesus did. But Jesus didn't take the bait. He took that question and pulled it out of midair and placed it on a dangerous road between Jericho. Now, we all know the story of this road and the man who fell among thieves. And they say that the priest and the Levite moved on by. And it was another man, a man of another race, who got down off his beast and administered first aid. He stopped to help this man, and he had projected the I into the thou. And Jesus went on to say that this was the good man. Now, we can use our imagination and say that the priest and the Levite were busy. They were on their way to a church meeting. We can imagine that they had some ecclesiastical business that they needed to tend to. Or we can understand that some believe that if they were about to perform some religious ceremony, that they were not to touch another human body for 24 hours before they did it. Some would say that perhaps they were going down to a Road Improvement Association meeting so that they could deal with the bigger problem rather than being stuck with this one individual that was there. But ultimately, Jesus said that the good man was the man who stopped by. Now, I understand that these men may have been afraid. I can remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as I got on that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. Perhaps the priest and the Levite thought that that man on the ground was merely acting like he had been hurt in order to lure them over there, seize them there for quick and easy seizure. So the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man in need, what will happen to him? That's the question before you tonight. Not if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor? The question is, if I do not stop to help this man in need, what will happen to him? So let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater of determination in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. And I can remember Mrs. King and I were first in New York City, signing autographs from the very first book that I had written. And while sitting there signing autographs, a black woman came up, and the only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing. I simply nodded my head yes. The next thing that I knew, I felt something beating on my chest, and I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital and operated on immediately. And the doctor said that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta. That's the main artery of the heart. Once it is punctured, that's the end of you because you're drowned in your own blood. Came out in the New York Times the very next day that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, they allowed me to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. I got a chance to read some of the letters that had come in, and kind letters that come in from all over the United States and all over the world. And I read a few. I want you to know that I received a telegram from the President of the United States. I've forgotten what that letter said. I received a telegram from the Vice President of the United States, and I've forgotten what that letter said. I received visits and letters from different governors of different states and different cities, and I've forgotten what those letters said. But there was a letter that came from a little girl in the White Plains High School, and I shall never forget it. She said very simply, "Dear Dr. King, I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering." She said, "Dr. King, while it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a 9th grade student and I'm a white girl." She said, "I read that if you had merely sneezed, you would have died." She said, "Dr. King, I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." You know, she was telling me, they were telling me that she must have recognized the significance. And in her innocence and in her small gesture, she recognized that if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in the 1960s when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation and interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when students all over the South were sitting in at lunch counters, and I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, taking this nation back to the great wells of democracy as dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I would have been in Albany, Georgia, to see men and women straighten their backs up. For whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here late in those years to try and tell America about a dream that I'd had. If I had sneezed. But you know, it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter what happens now. We left Atlanta this morning, and as we got on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system that we're sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all of the baggage was checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully. And we've had this plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory and the coming of our Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of His terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet which shall never call retreat. He has lifted up the hearts of men before His judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer Him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. Because I do this in the hopes that one person gets it. And I've been in front of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, hoping that one person gets it. And I just want you to know I feel some of y'all out there today. And my challenge to audiences often is let that one person be you. Don't leave the same way you came in. Do something a little bit different. Be kind, be loving, be forgiving, and start today. That's how we celebrate Martin Luther King. That's how we celebrate Black History Month. That's how we celebrate a world that is better tomorrow than it was yesterday. Thank you. Whew.
Thank you, Dr. Rivers, and what a blessing to hear all of your words, as well as the words of Martin Luther King. I think I want to take a moment right now just to reflect on what we've heard. He's given us so much to think about, to pray about. Let's take a moment right now in silent meditation and prayer. I'd like to invite you to join me in a prayer of response. There's so many ways that we could respond to what we've heard today, but I want to invite you in this time to join me in prayer. King Jesus, we confess that we gravitate toward those who look like us, live like us, vote like us. We confess that we seek friends who reinforce our own ideas. We confess that we draw lines that separate good from evil, clean from dirty, stigma from respect, insiders from outsiders. Yet you forgave those who hated you from the cross, cared for the outcasts, and taught us to bandage the wounds of our enemies. You showed us that shattering the boxes that define who is inside and who is outside is the kingdom way. Help me to cross borders in your name and to turn from the prejudices and hatreds that cripple my compassion. In my neediness, use me to care for the needs of others. In my woundedness, use me to heal their hurts and harms. May others see the mark of your mercy in my life and so desire to know you, love you, and serve you as your chosen disciples. To the glory and praise of our always faithful God. Amen.